YouTube doesn't tell you when my new videos are out unless you click that notification button and you're subscribed, so be sure to do that. And please, click the like button, guys, to keep this channel growing. Thank you. Do werewolves exist? Maybe they are just legends that make great Hollywood monsters. But with things like this mysterious non-dog, non-wolf creature devouring people's livestock in Montana, just go to show you that new species can still be discovered and even created. You're watching Darkness Prevails, the best channel to share your real horror stories with the world, because this world is a strange one. Today, we're going over 5 allegedly true stories from people who claim to have encountered werewolves. Are these mythical creatures real? Are they simply a rare and dangerous animal? Or is it all a hoax? You decide. If you want your true story featured in a future video, you can send it in at darknessprevails.org/submit. I'm looking for UPS drivers' creepy stories. Now then, lock your windows up tight. You don't want something crawling inside. Number 1. Werewolf Encounter on Vacation. Submitted by RAYEN. Every year on my summer holiday for the past 14 years now, I've been going to Ardèche in southern France. My family and I always stay on a camping site near an ancient little village in the mountains. It's one of those villages that slowly turned into a ghost town because most people moved to the city. Now, the people there are very kind, but one thing that actually amazed me is that almost all of them believed in the existence of werewolves, otherwise known as loup-garou in French. This might be because of the werewolf trials in France in the 17th century. Many people's lives were taken back then because they were accused of being werewolves. I like going to small villages like the one we camped near to. I often went there to take pictures of the beautiful old buildings. But when I came to know that these days, the people of the countryside were very heavy with their supernatural creature beliefs, I decided to ask one of the villagers if it was actually true, if they believed it as well, and why they did. The man I spoke to was very kind and open at first, but when I asked him if and why people here still believe in the existence of werewolves, he got awfully weird, and there was a serious and scared expression on his face. He replied that we shouldn't discuss this outside on the street. He led me over to his nearby backyard, away from the prying ears of his neighbors. When he got us both something to drink, he said with a timid voice, and said that the town had a strange secret since the Second World War. He told me that what they believed to be a werewolf has been stalking around this village and the nearby countryside. He believes that it lives in this very village. He said that the beast had never attacked any people so far, but on the full moon, you can actually hear a sinister howling sound coming from the nearby woods, and that sometimes cattle had gone missing or had been found slaughtered. Since this area was part of a huge national park, so it wasn't strange that you could encounter some wildlife, like deer or boar on the road or near your own home. But the man said that everyone, or at least all the elderly people, have seen it and believe the town's secret to be true. Some rumors suppose that the werewolf had been heard or even seen inside the village itself. While I listened to the man's story, I thought about going through this village again at night to explore the edge of the woods. I wanted to know how true this was, wanted to know what they thought was terrorizing them since World War II. Was it simply a rare species of animal, or is it like the movie show, a werewolf that passes on its curse to someone else? I wasn't sure I believed any of it, but I wanted to. When the man was done with his story, I thanked him profusely for his time and the drink he got me as well. Then I headed back to the campsite. That same night, I grabbed my flashlight, told my parents I was going on a late night walk, and I walked over to the village. I remember that the moon was full that night, and when I walked through the silent village, everyone inside their homes as the streets were empty, I did suddenly hear a howl in the distance. I immediately stood frozen, my senses on high alert, realizing that though I'd come out here to explore and find something, I didn't actually believe I would see anything. The hair standing on the back of my neck and arms told me that I was regretting this situation already. For a few minutes after that, it was silent. Just when I thought it was a dog or maybe a wolf, I heard another howl. It was much closer now. But this howl was so sinister and weird. I could hear it better the closer it got, and it seemed to me to be unlike anything I'd ever heard. I wasn't sure if wolves even lived in the wild in France anymore, and I was beginning to get really anxious because the howling got closer with each call, almost like the thing had pinpointed me and was coming from my location. Now, I'm a bigger guy for my age, and I'd like to say that I'm pretty tough, but I'll be completely honest with you. I was nearly soiling myself at the sound of that howl closing in, and I don't remember a time when I was more scared. The only thing that kept me from hurrying back to camp was my curiosity, and you know how that saying goes. I'd heard of the loup-garou, but I also wanted to see one with my own eyes. Being skeptical about werewolves is one thing, but seeing something like that in real life, that would be thrilling, even though it's probably a terrible idea. Not even 5 minutes later, I heard the final howl, and when I saw a long and eerie shadow on the road in front of me, I nearly had a heart attack. The shadow was nothing more than a silhouette, as it was still dark. It looked like a rather large and bulky stray dog. I could see it there, its furry body and long snout. But it wasn't alone. There was another one slowly revealing its head behind a house nearby. This one also had the same pointy ears and bulky body build. Even on all fours, these things nearly stood at my elbow height. They stared at me for a while, until one of them lurched forward suddenly, toward the road I was on. I now had a closer look at the thing, at least one of them. Up close, it definitely looked more wolf-like, and now that its teeth were bared, I could see how big its teeth were. Its eyes reflected a cold ice blue in my flashlight, and its body seemed to be hunched down rather than just on all fours, more akin to a gorilla walking around rather than a canine, and I could see just how muscular the thing was, reminding me more of an athletic pit bull. I was frozen, and I was both amazed and scared. I remember thinking that you should never turn your back on a wild animal and start running away. So I simply began to walk backwards, slowly, staring into the eyes of the creature in front of me. But for every step I took, the thing took one as well, keeping pace with me and snarling. I walked a little faster, but as I was going downhill, I needed to watch my steps, because if I fell, those things would be on top of me, and I would be food in no time. The animal was still following me and snarling. I soon noticed that it was actually gaining on me. I began to panic, and I walked even faster. I knew better than to look away from it, though. I was nearly at the edge of the village now, and I grew a little excited, thinking I was nearly back to my family. But then I realized, outside the village, that would be an even better place for them to attack. Surely, though, if they wanted me, wouldn't they have gotten me already? Maybe I was just hoping it was being territorial and simply wanted me out of the town. When I finally passed the last buildings at the edge of the town, the creature halted and just stood still. I was overjoyed. Maybe they were just territorial. And where the village began, the animal's territory ended. But I didn't stop, and I didn't stop looking back at them. I simply backed away even faster than before. I kept watching the one that stood at the edge of the village staring back at me until I could no longer see it. And from that moment, I ran the 2.5 miles back to the camping site as quickly as I could, continuously looking behind me to see if I was being pursued. I blazed back to the camping site, and when I got back, I collapsed. I was exhausted, and my adrenaline had been pumping for so long. My parents asked me what was going on, why I'd come back running like the devil was after me. But since I knew my dad wouldn't believe my story, I ended up telling my mom what had happened. I was in disbelief of my own situation, so it kind of comforted me when she confirmed that she had heard a creepy howling coming from the woods. Even my dad said he had heard it too. That night, I could barely sleep after what had happened, and the following day I went back to the village to see the man, the guy who told me the story originally. When he opened the door, I told him that I had to tell him a story. We sat down in the backyard again, and I told him what happened the previous night. He listened closely to me, and after I finished the story, the man admitted that he already knew, because he and a number of the other villagers from their homes had watched the scene unfold. Number 2. Werewolf at My Mom's House, submitted by NovaCat12. We lived in southern Arkansas in Dallas County. Since my parents had been divorced since I was 3, I lived with my father. I asked if we could go over to my mom's house one Saturday, and my dad said yes. So I went over to my mom's place to spend some time with her and chat. We hung out, and later that night, her and some friends decided to play some Dungeons and Dragons. We played for around 2 hours. My mom's place can get pretty hot, so I asked her at one point if I could go outside to cool off. She said that I could, and we could pause the game for the time I was outside, make it a little break time. Now, my mom lives in the countryside in Arkansas River Valley, a few hours from where I live. Near her place, there's this dirt trail to the front of her house. At the time, it must have been 11:30, but I can't be sure. I decided to walk that trail for a few minutes. I walked for about 20 minutes in all, but about 10 minutes into the walk, I heard a stick or twig break behind me. I was startled, and I turned but didn't see anything. So after a moment of silence, I kept on walking down the path. I didn't hear anything for another 6 minutes, but this time, it sounded much closer. I was startled again, and I was beginning to get creeped out, so I decided maybe it was time to get back to my house. A few seconds going back, I saw something in the middle of the road. I don't think it saw me, and I was glad that it didn't. The thing was on all fours at the time, but still stood at about 5 feet tall. Its legs were bent back like the ones of a dog or cat's would be, and from what I could see from the moon behind the clouds, it had a reddish-brown fur color. Its torso and arms were shaped like an adult man, and it had the head of a German shepherd, yet bigger and much bulkier. I don't really know why I stood there for so long, just looking at the beast instead of running away. But due to its appearance, one thing came to me right away: the word werewolf. After I observed it, I tried to sneak away, and I wasn't paying any attention to where I was walking, and ended up stepping on a fallen branch. When I did, the creature turned to look at me, and it stood straight up on its hind legs. At that point, it was easily 7 feet tall. Its eyes were yellow-green in color, from what I could see from the moonlight, and I didn't know what I was going to do. The only thing I could do was run, but you should never run from a predator that size. I knew better than that. Yet I was still terrified, and I did what my body told me to. I ran as fast as I possibly could. The creature growled from behind me, and I heard something heavy crashing through the woods behind me. It drew closer to me at an amazing, unnatural speed. Just when I thought I could feel its breath on the back of my neck, it stopped. When I made it out of the trail, I dared to look back, and I saw it there standing straight up and looking at something in the distance. Apparently something else had made it more curious and interested than me. It didn't pay me any mind and simply left, and I went back to running, making it home in only a few minutes. When I got inside, my mom asked me what was wrong, why I was crying. I told her I went for a walk and then a run down the path, and that the wind had forced tears out of my eyes. She said that was fine, though she was still suspicious in her voice. We resumed our game. Later on, after everyone went home, she grabbed my shoulder and asked what really happened, but I stuck to my story, ignoring her endearing, suspicious glances. She told me to never go back on that path again. She knew something had happened. Number 3. Something at my window. Submitted by Xander C. I was 11 at the time, and I lived in a small cabin by a stretch of woods. My cousins wanted to play some hide and seek and tag in the woods one day, and my house was right at the base of these woods. My mom and dad had left for the night, so we were home to ourselves. We all went out to play hide and seek. Then it happened. It started when my youngest cousin, Mike, was seeking. We went to hide, and he began counting. But after about an hour passed, with dead silence, we decided to head back home, wondering what had happened to Mike. While walking home, we heard the most blood-curdling howl we'd ever heard, and decided to book it back to the house, which was about 30 yards away. About halfway back, we suddenly heard some heavy footsteps gaining on us from behind. When we opened the front door, we slammed it shut almost instantly, then looked at each other absolutely mortified, thinking, what in the world was that? And then we realized that Anne, my other cousin, was still out there. I was seconds away from crying when Anne herself started knocking at the door and screaming to be let in. We did so and immediately locked the door behind her. Anne was already crying. I pleaded with her, wanting to know what was wrong, but she said nothing, a terrible expression on her face. My younger cousin had said, "Look at the window. There's something out there." We stayed at our spots distant from the window, but we stared at it, and soon something stared back. There were eyes, red eyes, attached to a figure that appeared to be bending down and peering through the window. We ran upstairs and into my room, locking each and every door behind us. When we got to my room, we heard this heavy thumping sound on the roof, and we were all crying by then. We were so terrified that I ended up calling the cops. An hour later, we saw headlights pull up in the driveway, but this was long after the sounds had died off. When we told the cops our story, boy did we get the chewing out of a lifetime. We were accused of lying, and said they were forced to tell my parents what happened. I got in a lot of trouble over that, but I'd rather be grounded for life rather than being eaten by something that was peering into my window at night. Number 4. The Rocky Mount, Virginia Dogman of Winter 2009. Submitted by James. The story I'm about to tell you takes place about 8 years ago, back in the summer of 2009, when I was only 15 years old. As a 15-year-old, I was pretty quiet, and even selectively mute. I kept to myself because it was always difficult for me to deeply connect with other people, and to be accepted by them, due to the fact that my ideology was labeled as eccentric, because I always deferred from the rest as if I was trying to argue, but that was simply how I expressed myself. As for my hobbies, they just simply weren't appreciated by everyone, so I didn't really have any friends. You could say I was ostracized and exiled, some sort of outcast of my age group, a misfit inside and out of my home and society. So with that being said, I guess you can assume that I avoided others. I stuck to isolating and alienating myself from other people. It was the only way I could have a peace of mind, some individualism and independence, and freedom for that matter. In fact, solitude always brought me some level of comfort, as long as I felt free. At that time, I lived with my mother, Bonnie, and my twin brother, Jared. I was attending Franklin County High School, and I had recently gotten my first job as a youth worker after my mentor referred me to my county's local Goodwill Industries of the Valleys, which was a government-funded program for disadvantaged youth. I worked for Goodwill for roughly a year before I was terminated due to the funding of the program expiring. Our responsibilities and duties consisted of things ranging from warehouse work, such as taking in and organizing donated clothes and merchandise, doing inventory, stocking, zoning, cleaning, and other days we would carpool out into the neighborhood and participate in community construction projects. All in all, they kept us very busy. One winter evening, the sun was setting, and we were finishing up carving an elderly woman's driveway, freeing up the thicket of snow that had accumulated prior from that night's snowfall. That day, the group of workers consisted of myself, my twin brother, and a number of male and female peers of mine that were mutual students from the high school. The group consisted of about 5 or 6 people, excluding other Goodwill staff members. I was positioned in the back near the woods by myself, with my twin brother in the front, and our other group member on the far side of the house, further ahead of where I was. After about 15 to 20 minutes had passed of shoveling and chucking snow to carve somewhat a decent path, I heard a twig crack in half very loudly. I knew something was moving around behind me in the brush, making the brush and the bushes behind me rustle, as if something was treading through them while entangled, trying to get itself free. Having the rational mentality that I had back then, I assumed that it was a neighborhood dog, or something from the owners of the home or a nearby neighbor. When I looked behind me to see the source of the sound, I immediately dropped my shovel out of shock. My blood ran cold, and I felt a fluttery sensation in my chest that rose up in my throat, as if I was choking on my pounding heart. I met the golden glinted glare of a tall and lanky figure that had the body of a grizzly bear and the head of a dog. It was covered in matted jet black fur with dagger-like teeth and a set of large fangs bared. Its snout was tensed and its eyes were squinted, giving me an angry and hideous look of hostility, as if it wanted to rip me to shreds right then, right there. But it did nothing. It simply stared at me, not moving a muscle. The figure stood on its hind legs from its crouching position, and I swear it measured up to about 8 or 9 feet tall. I saw it open its maw as if it were about to speak. I swear I saw it mouth something, like a human would. And with that, the figure fled back to where it came, out of sight, but not out of mind. For the rest of that day, that scene replayed itself. I could almost hear its voice in my head, a deep, guttural, demonic, cold, rattling thing that sounded long expired and dried up. I never told anyone about what had happened that night, about what I had experienced. I feel I don't need to. No one would have believed me anyway. This may be something that I take to my grave. And number 5, My Dogman Encounter, submitted by Gavin C. I'll admit it, I'm a paranormal and monster fanatic. I read and listen to a whole bunch of scary stories, and I also watch some of the lost tapes every now and then, and never fail to enjoy myself. I know if I shared this story with anyone else, they wouldn't believe me and they would say it's just from those stupid shows I always watch. But this is far more than my imagination. In fact, it's not my imagination at all. This happened 2018, March 9th. We have a chicken coop out at our place in a small town in Nebraska, and every night I go out to shut them up so nothing gets in there. We have around 27 chickens, and we lose maybe 1 a year due to weather or the chickens just pecking at each other. Overall, it's not so bad. Whenever we do lose a chicken, we throw it into the tree pile behind the coop. The bodies will normally get picked up by a coyote after a few days, or some other scavenger. Well, one morning I saw that we had just lost a chicken, so I threw it in the usual pile after I finished feeding and watering the rest. Later that day, when it got dark, I went out to do my normal nightly routine. That night, there were coyotes in the cornfield across the road, as there usually were. So I went out, and I always have my LED flashlight with me, so I turned it on and headed over to the coop. As I was walking out to the chicken coop, the coyotes yelped, then went silent, and so did my dog, who was usually going insane because of the coyotes. I was a little bit freaked out, but I kept on going to the chicken coop, at least to just get it over with. I shut everything up. I was just about to get my dog and head to the house, finally done with everything. But then I heard something moving behind the chicken coop. I figured it was a cat or a coyote getting a little too close, so I went over to scare it off. I didn't want to lose any more chickens. But as I walked up, I could hear something growling and more movement. Then I heard a terrible sound, the sound of flesh being ripped from bone. I ran behind the chicken coop. Bad idea. When I rounded the corner, I immediately froze, and there was a figure taller than I was, a creature that had managed to grab one of the chickens before I shut the door. The thing was huge in terms of muscle, like my football coach, but taller, minus the coyote-looking head that it had. Its eyes were yellow, and they seemed to glow in the moonlight. Its fur was brown, and it had 2 white patches on its eyes. It smelled like a mix between wet dog and skunk. Weird and awful. After a few seconds of just staring at it, it walked off into the woods, my chicken in hand, acting like I wasn't even there. Maybe I just wasn't worth its time. I ran back to the house and almost forgot my poor dog, which I grabbed, and when we got in the house, my mother asked why I was so frantic. I stuttered out an excuse, telling her that a coyote had grabbed a dead chicken out of the pile, and then I went to bed. I swear, though, I heard something just outside my window all night. At one point, I thought I saw those yellow, glowing eyes. The next morning, I was able to find some prints behind the coop. I did my chicken chores for the day and went with my dad out to the feedlot to help him. When we got back, we saw something large crossing the road and running into the forest, and that was the last I ever saw of it. Hopefully, the very last I'll ever see of it, whatever it really was. So you might not believe in werewolves. I can't blame you. But it's hard not to believe that something is out there. Something that's taking your livestock. Something that's scaring small villages against going out at night. So, what really haunts the countryside? And will you ever be unlucky enough to encounter it? Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Don't forget, you can send me your scary stories at darknessprevails.org/submit. I'm currently looking for stories about UPS drivers. If you want to support my channel, think about donating just $1 a month to my Patreon, getting some Darkness Prevails merchandise, or downloading my free app. All those links are in the description. As usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from my previous video about 5 Memorial Day stories. The KGB says, still hiding under the bed. Apparently I've had some KGB agents under my bed for a while, probably surviving off of my hair and Snickers wrappers. Ellie Garcia says, fried chicken or grilled chicken? Well, I'd say grilled chicken over rice, but I prefer fried chicken everywhere else. And hey, food questions are always serious questions with me. Stasia Euler says, New Zealand loves you, Darkness. Thank you, and I'm so sorry if I mispronounced your name terribly. I'm just an Arkansas hick trying to scare people, but it makes me happy to know that I've got fans worldwide. George Sulaika says, I'm a paratrooper, and thanks for the military stories, as I've always wanted to hear something from there about weird stuff they've seen. Exactly, I know there are tons more stories even creepier than what I've seen so far, because if anyone's seen some crazy crap, it's the military. Bailey Foose says, my friend is going into the Philippines tomorrow. Uh-oh. Well, they're going to be Aswang food, so nice knowing them. Anyways guys, thank you so much for tuning in to another Darkness Prevails video. There's plenty more scary videos coming soon, so stay tuned. Until next time, here are the credits to the patrons who continue to donate. Stay safe out there, and stay creepy.